What does it take to become one of the most recognizable faces of a generation, a teenager receiving 4,000 fan letters every single week, only to be found in your Los Angeles apartment at 27, with nothing left of the career that had once made you untouchable? In the early 1990s, Jonathan Brandis wasn't just an actor. He was a phenomenon. The boy whose face sold magazines, whose name appeared on posters in bedrooms across America, and whose talent had placed him at the center of Stephen King's It, and one of the decade's most watched television series. He had everything the industry could offer a young man, but then, one by one, the industry took it all back. Beneath all of that manufactured fame was a story nobody in Hollywood had any real interest in examining, one that ended in tragedy in November 2003. So what really happened to Jonathan Brandis? And what does it say about a system that builds its stars up young and has no plan for what comes after? To understand that, you have to go back to where it all started. Jonathan Brandis was born on April 13th, 1976, in Danbury, Connecticut. He was not discovered at a mall or stumbled upon at a school play. From practically the moment he could walk, the entertainment industry was already part of his life. He was modeling at the age of 2 and appearing in television commercials by the time he was 4 years old. His parents supported his early career, and by the time most children his age were learning to read, Brandis was already accumulating professional credits. That is the reality of child stardom in America. It does not begin at adolescence. For some people, it begins in the crib, and the industry makes certain you never forget that the clock started ticking the day they found you. By the time he reached his early teens, his resume was already substantial. Soap operas, TV movies, a steady accumulation of guest spots that built his presence in the industry quietly and consistently. And then, in 1990, 2 projects arrived that changed the trajectory of everything. The first was The Never-Ending Story 2, the next chapter, where Brandis took on the lead role of Bastian Bucks, the young boy pulled into a magical fantasy world at the heart of the story. It was a high-profile role in a sequel to a beloved film, and it put his face in front of an enormous audience. The second was Stephen King's It, the television miniseries adaptation of one of the most famous and enduring horror novels ever written. Brandis played young Bill Denbrough, the leader of the Losers Club, the moral center of the entire story, the boy with the stutter who refused to stop fighting back. It was a genuinely demanding performance for a teenager, and he delivered it with the kind of conviction the material required. It became a cultural event. Entire generations watched it, talked about it, and were frightened by it together. And Jonathan Brandis was at the center of it. The early years of the decade built on that momentum quickly. In 1992, he appeared in Ladybugs alongside Rodney Dangerfield, and in Sidekicks alongside Chuck Norris, 2 films that solidified his status as one of the most bankable young actors working in Hollywood. He was everywhere, simultaneously, and the industry knew exactly what it had on its hands. But nothing in that period, nothing, prepared anyone for what came next. In 1993, Brandis was cast as Lucas Wolinchak in Sequest DSV, Steven Spielberg's ambitious underwater science fiction series for NBC. It was a major production with serious resources behind it, and Brandis was positioned as its breakout star, the teenage genius of the crew, the character the network was explicitly marketing toward a younger demographic. The result was a level of fame that is genuinely difficult to put into context. At his peak, Brandis was receiving up to 4,000 fan letters every single week. To hold that number in your head for a moment, that is 571 letters every day of the week, including Sundays, written by real people who were sitting down and putting words on paper specifically for him. He required 3 security guards to move through studio lots without being overwhelmed. His face was on the cover of every teen magazine that mattered, and the fan response he generated was the kind of fervent, consuming adoration that the industry manufactures rarely and exploits without restraint. Jonathan Brandis, at 17 years old, was one of the most famous teenagers in America. And the machine had no intention of letting that go to waste. Here's the thing about fame at that scale, at that age. It comes with a ceiling that nobody mentions when they are handing you the keys. Jonathan Brandis was not a passive recipient of his celebrity. He was genuinely driven, genuinely talented, and genuinely ambitious about the direction he wanted his career to take. He had a serious interest in directing, not as a vague aspiration to be mentioned in magazine interviews, but as an active professional pursuit he was already building toward. During his time on Sequest DSV, he co-wrote an episode of the series, The Siamese Dream, a concrete creative step that went well beyond what most actors his age were attempting. He had plans to direct an episode of the show too, but Sequest was canceled before that could happen. The short film he had been working on, The Slanesville Boys, would have been his directorial debut. That is not the behavior of someone coasting on their looks. That is someone treating their craft as something worth developing over a lifetime. But Hollywood has a very specific and very ruthless relationship with young actors who become famous for being beloved by teenagers. It puts them in a box, markets them to exhaustion inside that box. And then, when they age out of the demographic the box was designed for, it simply moves on. There is no transition program. There is no institutional support for the person who has to wake up the morning after the fan letters stop and figure out how to build the second act of a career in a town that has already categorized them. The industry extracts the commercial value of their youth and leaves the resulting human being to work out the rest independently. For Brandis, the shift was brutal in ways that the enormous brightness of his earlier career only made more apparent by contrast. The covers stopped. The letters stopped. The parts that came through were smaller, less prestigious, less of everything that had defined his professional reality for the better part of a decade. He had grown up entirely on camera, his face changing, his voice deepening, his look shifting from child actor to teenager to young man in full public view. And now, he was being asked to audition for a version of Hollywood that had never particularly wanted him as an adult. The gap between how he had been defined by the industry and what the industry was now willing to offer him was enormous, and it does not close quietly. It closes the way most things in Hollywood close, without apology, without acknowledgement, and without any concern for the cost to the person on the other side of it. He kept working. He kept showing up. He kept pursuing the projects that might demonstrate what he was actually capable of as an adult actor and a filmmaker. And in 2002, something arrived that looked, finally, like the break he had been working toward. He landed a role in Heart's War, a major studio war film set in a German POW camp, starring Bruce Willis and Colin Farrell. This was precisely the kind of project that could reframe how the industry and the public understood him. A serious dramatic film, A-list co-stars, genuine prestige potential. For Brandis, this was not just a job. It was an argument, a case he was making to Hollywood that he deserved to be in those rooms, doing that work, on those terms. But what happened next is one of the quieter cruelties the industry delivers without flinching. When Heart's War was released, Brandis's lines had been cut entirely from the final film. He is still visible in a handful of background shots, and the scenes he actually filmed can be found on the DVD's deleted section. But in the version the world saw, the role he had genuinely invested in had been silenced. Friends spoke openly about what this did to him. It was not simply professional disappointment, the kind of setback that working actors learn to absorb and move past. It was the particular devastation of having a specific, meaningful opportunity, the one that was supposed to matter, the one that was supposed to prove something, quietly removed. The industry does not explain those decisions. It does not offer context or consolation. It moves on, and it expects you to do the same. Jonathan Brandis was 27 years old in the autumn of 2003. Heart's War had silenced him on screen, but there had been another blow that same year that almost nobody outside his immediate circle knew about at the time. He had been cast in a television pilot called 111 Gramercy Park, a drama series alongside Frank Langella and Tippi Hedren that represented exactly the kind of adult prestige work he had been chasing. Jaleel White, who was also in the cast, later wrote that Brandis asked him repeatedly about their pickup chances, more than any other actor on the project. It mattered to him in a way that went beyond a standard job. However, the pilot was not picked up. He was still creating through all of it. The Slanesville Boys, the short film that would have been his directorial debut, was in the works and would be released posthumously in 2004. But people close to him had noticed the weight he was carrying. Friends reported that he had been drinking heavily and had spoken openly about not wanting to go on. His father, Greg, speaking years later, said that Jonathan had likely been dealing with undiagnosed bipolar disorder through his 20s. That the pain was not only the industry's doing, but a collision of that pressure with something much harder to see from the outside. On the night of November 11th, 2003, a friend arrived at his Los Angeles apartment and found him in the hallway. He had taken his own life. Emergency services were called. He was taken to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where he passed away the following day, November 12th, 2003. He did not leave a note. He was only 27 years old. Jaleel White, when he heard the news, called his mother and told her, "This business kills people from the inside." The city that had put Brandis's face on billboards went about its business, as it always does, without missing a beat. What did not happen in the aftermath is worth naming. No one in a position of structural power in Hollywood looked at the arc of Jonathan Brandis's career and asked what responsibility the industry bore for the conditions that surrounded his death. No network reviewed the decision to build its marketing strategy around a 17-year-old and asked whether generating 4,000 fan letters a week for a teenager, without any corresponding support infrastructure, was something that required examination in retrospect. No studio issued any acknowledgement of the particular psychological weight that comes with being a child star who ages out of the category that made him famous, because the conversation about what the industry owes the people it uses never quite arrived. There were individual moments of grief, and then the calendar moved forward. And if you want to understand exactly how that silence operates in practice, how the industry communicates its verdict on a person without ever saying a word directly, you only have to look at what happened 2 years before his death. Because of all the chapters in Jonathan Brandis's story, one captures the dynamic more precisely than any other. The Hearts War situation sits at the center of Brandis's story precisely because it captures that dynamic so clearly. He had done everything right. Pursued serious work, co-written episodes, developed projects, partnered with credible talent, demonstrated the range the industry always claimed it wanted to see from him. And the response was to cut him from the final edit. That decision, made by people with the power to make it and no obligation to explain it, communicated something specific about how the industry valued him as an adult. And it did so in the most efficient way Hollywood knows, through silence and through absence. The pattern Brandis experienced is not exceptional. It is the standard operating procedure. The industry identifies young talent, invests in it while the demographic returns are strong, and then withdraws the moment the commercial calculus shifts. With no off-ramp, no managed transition, no honest conversation about what happens to the person after the machine has finished with the product. What gets left behind is a human being who built their entire professional identity inside an industry that has now reclassified them as a liability, and no blueprint for what comes next. That is what section after section of Brandis's career keeps returning to, not as a unique failure, but as a system working exactly as designed. Jonathan Brandis was 4 years old when he first performed for a camera. He was 17 when America decided it loved him, and he was 27 when it was over. So here is the question worth sitting with. How many Jonathan Brandises are out there right now? Young people being turned into commodities by an industry that has no plan for the person underneath the brand. And what exactly is Hollywood prepared to do about it? Let me know your thoughts on this story in the comments. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.